Is Red Bull hiding its true potential, or are there signs that competition is coming? What we saw in Bahrain left more questions than answers, but before I explain, tell me in the comments. Do you think Red Bull will dominate again, or will it have real competition this time? Because the track times say one thing, but the technical details could say another. Red Bull finished the Bahrain test with an RB21 that, at first glance, looks like an evolution of the RB20. But the third day of testing brought a key change, a new nose design that optimizes aerodynamics. During testing, Max Verstappen set solid times, but Mercedes with George Russell finished with the best time on the last day, beating the Dutchman by just 0.021 seconds. This small difference might seem like a sign that Mercedes has closed the gap, but it must be seen in context. Preseason testing does not accurately reflect the real hierarchy of the grid. Each team works with different programs, configurations, and fuel loads, which makes lap times misleading. Teams also use preseason testing to try different levels of engine power. Red Bull rarely shows its true pace in testing, as its priority is to gather aerodynamic data and test the car's reliability. While Verstappen finished second on the final day, the team does not appear to have sought to set a benchmark time. Another key point is the evolution of the RB21 over the 3 days. At the start of testing, the car looked almost identical to the RB20. This strategy raised speculation about whether Red Bull was hiding its true innovations. But on the third day, the team revealed a major modification to the car's nose. The new design features a more rounded nose and a small opening at the bottom. This change is not just aesthetic but has an aerodynamic purpose. Red Bull is looking to reduce drag on long straights and improve the efficiency of airflow under the chassis. These kinds of changes often indicate that the team is optimizing the car for high-speed circuits, suggesting that its development is not yet finished. One important detail is that Verstappen suffered a spin in the last half hour of the final session. Although this had no consequences on the car, it is a sign that Red Bull is still exploring the limits of the car. The sudden loss of control could be related to the adaptation to the new aerodynamic configurations, indicating that the team is still fine-tuning key details before the start of the season. The conditions in Bahrain were more complicated than usual. Cold temperatures, strong winds, and even some rain altered the test programs of all the teams. These variables can significantly affect the balance of the car and make the data collected not completely representative of what will be seen in the season. The key is in how Red Bull managed these factors. Despite the unstable conditions, the RB21 showed a solid performance, with no mechanical problems or significant interruptions. While other teams struggled with setup tweaks, Red Bull managed to maintain remarkable consistency, which is an indication that its development base remains one of the most stable on the grid. Another point to consider is the team's development strategy. Red Bull has followed a trend in recent years where it introduces gradual improvements in preseason, rather than making radical changes from the start. What was seen in Bahrain could be just the first phase of its aerodynamic evolution. In the first races of the season, especially on circuits with different characteristics to Bahrain, the team is likely to introduce new updates that maximize the performance of the RB21. The big question is whether rivals have managed to get close enough to challenge Red Bull since the start of the championship. Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren showed competitive performance in Bahrain, and teams such as Williams surprised with outstanding times. If the gap has really narrowed, the 2025 season could be much more closely contested than expected. However, recent history shows that Red Bull tend to hide some of their potential in preseason and unlock their true performance when it really matters, in the first qualifying of the year. Until then, what was seen in Bahrain leaves more questions than answers. Red Bull arrived at the Bahrain test with the RB21, a car that at first glance looked like an evolution of the RB20. For the first 2 days, the car maintained an almost identical appearance to its predecessor, leading to speculation that the team was hiding its true innovations. However, on the final day, Red Bull introduced a key change, a new nose design with a more rounded shape and a small opening at the bottom. This change is not a simple cosmetic modification. Red Bull has worked on optimizing the airflow under the chassis, one of the keys to improving aerodynamic efficiency and reducing drag on long straights. On circuits such as Monza or Spa-Francorchamps, where top speed is a determining factor, this type of adjustment could make the difference in the fight for pole and tire management in the race. The team also used the test to evaluate the car's consistency on long runs. Max Verstappen completed race simulations and highlighted that the RB21 felt stable and predictable, a significant difference compared to the RB20, which in some conditions showed more unpredictable behavior. This detail is key, as it indicates that Red Bull has worked on refining the setup of the car to make it more manageable on different types of circuits and conditions. One of the most relevant aspects of the preseason is the reliability of the car. During the 3 days of testing, the RB21 did not present significant mechanical failures, which allowed the team to complete its program without interruptions. In today's Formula One, where component management is key due to the limited engines and gearboxes per season, starting the year without reliability problems is a strategic advantage. The context of the times recorded in the tests is also fundamental to understanding the performance of the RB21. On the last day, George Russell achieved the fastest time of the day with Mercedes, beating Verstappen by just 0.021 seconds. While on the surface this might suggest that the gap between the two teams has narrowed, it should be noted that preseason testing does not accurately reflect the actual performance of each team. Red Bull rarely shows its true pace in testing. The team's priority is not to set the best lap, but to gather aerodynamic data, test different fuel load levels and evaluate the car's response in different conditions. The RB21 may still have significant room for improvement, especially as the team begins to unlock more performance in the first races of the year. Another key detail is how the car performed compared to its direct rivals. While Red Bull maintained a progressive approach with its development, teams such as Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren showed competitive pace from the start. Williams also surprised with Alex Albon finishing just 0.105 seconds off the best time on the final day. This narrowing of the time gap could suggest a tighter grid for 2025, although the true hierarchy will only be seen when the season starts. Testing conditions also played a major role in assessing the RB21's performance. Bahrain featured cooler than usual temperatures, strong winds and some rain at times. These variables affect the car's behavior and make the data difficult to interpret. Despite this, Red Bull managed to maintain its consistency, suggesting that the car has a wide operating range and the ability to adapt to different scenarios. The RB21 represents a calculated evolution rather than a radical redesign. Red Bull has opted for methodical development, optimizing key aspects rather than completely changing its aerodynamic philosophy. This strategy has worked well in recent years, allowing the team to maintain its dominance without the need for drastic modifications to its underlying concept. The real question is how much potential the RB21 still has to unlock. If Red Bull has followed its usual pattern, it is likely that it has not yet shown all its cards. In the first few races of the season, when the team can use its engine settings without restrictions and apply all the knowledge gained in preseason, we will really see how far this car can go. The RB21's performance in Bahrain testing left several signals about the possible outlook for the 2025 season. Red Bull continues to show a solid foundation, with a car that maintains the essence of the RB20 but with strategic adjustments to optimize its performance. The introduction of a new nose on the last day of testing confirms that the team continues to refine its concept, rather than seeking an aerodynamic revolution. Although Mercedes finished testing with the best time on the final day and other teams such as Ferrari, McLaren and Williams showed improvements, the reality is that preseason times are not an absolute reference. Red Bull has shown in recent years that it rarely shows its maximum performance in testing, focusing on data collection and fine-tuning the car for race conditions. The RB21 showed reliability and consistency on long runs, suggesting that Red Bull has worked to correct some of the balance problems that affected the RB20 at certain circuits. Max Verstappen said the car felt stable and predictable, a key factor in maintaining the lead throughout the season. The analysis of the competition suggests that the gap between Red Bull and the rest of the teams may have been reduced, but there is still no certainty that anyone can challenge their dominance from the first race. The key will be in the development they make during the season and whether Red Bull has room to unlock more performance from the RB21 in the early rounds of the calendar. Another aspect to consider is the team's evolution strategy. Red Bull has followed a pattern in which it introduces improvements progressively, rather than revealing its full potential from the start. The first few races are likely to be a more accurate thermometer of how far this car can go and whether the competition has really taken a big enough step forward to threaten the dominance of Verstappen and his team. The 2025 season is shaping up to be one of the most interesting in recent years. With the grid seemingly tighter and several teams showing signs of progress, the possibility of a closer fight at the top is looming. However, Red Bull remains the team to beat until someone proves otherwise on a real race weekend. The first big challenge will come at the Australian Grand Prix. There we will see if the Bahrain tests were a true representation of the level of each team or if Red Bull still has room to surprise with a performance that it did not show in preseason. The dominance of recent years has not been built only with speed, but with impeccable operational execution, precise strategy, and an ability to adapt superior to that of its rivals. If Red Bull manages to maintain its advantage in the first part of the season and continues to evolve the RB21 as the races progress, it will remain the benchmark of Formula One. But if the competition has really closed the gap, then a much more contested championship is on the horizon than we have seen in recent years.